I spent 3 days preparing a Christmas feast, stuffing the turkey, polishing the good silver, even making their favorite pies from scratch. But when the doorbell didn't ring, and the candles melted down to nothing, I realized they weren't late. They just didn't come. No call. No text. Nothing. That was the moment I decided. Next Christmas wouldn't be spent waiting. It would be spent winning. It started with a grocery list. I had it all mapped out, every spice, every dish, every detail. Christmas was always mine to host. I'd raised 2 boys at this table, buried my husband not far from it, and kept our home standing through grief, recessions, and 2 kitchen remodels. I was the constant. The one who made holidays feel like holidays. So this year, I went all out. I ordered a fresh turkey from the butcher. Not frozen, fresh. I baked 3 pies the day before, pecan, apple crumble and chocolate silk. I laid out the fancy napkins, the embroidered ones I only take out once a year. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and nutmeg. My back ached. My knees throbbed. But I was proud. It was December 25th, 4 p.m. sharp. Dinner time. I stood in the doorway, wearing my forest green cardigan over a cream blouse and beige slacks. Hair curled, silver gray and neat. Lipstick on. The good china gleamed on the table. Candles flickered gently, casting golden shadows across the dining room. I even put a tiny sprig of holly at every place setting. And I waited. First 15 minutes. Then 30. Then an hour. I checked my phone. No messages. I called my older son. Straight to voicemail. Then the younger one. Same thing. I told myself maybe they were running late. Maybe the roads were icy. Maybe the kids had a meltdown or someone forgot the rolls. I kept the food warm in the oven. Refilled the candles. Re-smoothed my cardigan. At 6:30, the candles burned out. At 7 o'clock, I gave up and sat down alone. That was the moment it hit me, they weren't coming. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat at the head of the table and stared at the empty chairs. Each one with a name card. Each one with a full plate that would go untouched. I had imagined laughter. I had imagined my grandkids tearing into presents. I had imagined my sons arguing over football like they always did. But now there was just me, and the sound of the heater kicking on. It was quiet. So painfully quiet. When I finally opened my phone again, there it was. A photo. Posted by my daughter-in-law. Smiling faces. My sons. Their wives. The grandkids. All of them gathered around a big table filled with food. Prime rib, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. The caption? So grateful for this family time. Merry Christmas. I stared at it like it was a punch to the gut. Not a word to me. Not a text. Not a missed call. They'd made other plans. Together. And didn't think I even needed to be told. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my fingers clenched around my phone like it could explain why. I thought back to every favor I'd done. Every loan I forgave. Every birthday card, every school pickup, every late-night call when they needed something. And now I wasn't even worth a cancellation. I got up, reheated a slice of pecan pie, and ate it standing over the sink. That's when something snapped. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about every little cut they'd made over the past few years. The times they forgot my birthday. The way my daughter-in-law always corrected me in front of the kids. The way my younger son once told me, "It's just easier when we don't have to explain things to you." I had been disappearing in front of them for years. Quietly. Bit by bit. And this Christmas silence, was just the final shove. So I made a decision. Next year, they would not be able to ignore me. Not because I begged. Not because I baked. But because I would become someone they couldn't afford to look away from. I didn't know what that meant yet. But I had time. A full year. I was done being the invisible host with warm pies and a seat nobody sat in. If they could build a world where I didn't exist, I'd build one they didn't belong in. And I'd start with the one thing they never thought I'd do. I pulled out the folder I hadn't opened in 5 years, the one marked assets, and I started planning. The folder was thick with papers, bank statements, investment summaries, property deeds. All things my sons never asked about, because they assumed I didn't have much to my name. Just the old house and a pension check, right? That's what my daughter-in-law once told her friend on speakerphone, thinking I wasn't in the room. She's sweet, but she's got nothing. Probably living off Social Security. I had to bite my tongue that day. But now? Now I smiled as I sifted through the documents. They had no idea. After my husband died, I didn't just sit around crocheting sweaters. I started small, invested a portion of his life insurance payout into a local storage facility partnership. It grew. I reinvested. Then came stocks, rental property, a little silent partnership in a lakeside cafe. Turns out, being underestimated is great for growing wealth in peace. By the end of that week, I'd tallied everything up. Net worth, just shy of $2.1 million. And nobody knew. Not my sons. Not my accountant. I did my own books. Not even my best friend Nancy, who always teased me about being tight with a dollar. I wasn't tight. I was strategic. And now it was time to weaponize that strategy. I started by calling my lawyer, Charles. He's a kind man, older than my boys, and he always treated me like I had a brain, not just a coupon collection. Charles, I said calmly, I'd like to revise my will. Effective immediately. Of course, he replied. Shall I pull up the last version? No, I said, sitting a little taller. I want to start fresh. And this time, I want it airtight. I didn't explain the full story. I didn't need to. But he could hear the steel in my voice. I made 2 major changes. I removed both of my sons as primary heirs. I created a living trust, not just to protect my assets, but to control how they were seen from the outside. I named the new beneficiary, a foundation in my name. One that I would build over the next 12 months. A fund dedicated to supporting older adults who'd been cast aside by their families, and women starting over in their 70s, just like me. The Clara Sutton Foundation. Let that name be something they'd see in headlines someday. While the paperwork was being drawn up, I made another quiet move. I listed my house for sale, privately. No sign on the lawn. Just a direct connection to a real estate agent I trusted. I loved that house. My husband had built the bookshelves in the study with his own hands. But the truth was, I didn't need to cling to it anymore. It held memories, yes. But also silence. And this year's Christmas dinner had turned it into a shrine of grief. I needed a new chapter. So I sold it. Fast. Cash buyer. Above asking. The market was on fire. Then I did something that felt like pulling off a mask. I booked a long-term suite at a luxury senior residence, the kind with a private chef, concierge service, and a fitness center better than most resorts. I moved in quietly, with just 3 boxes, my wedding album, and a carefully hidden plan. No one knew. My sons didn't call. My grandkids didn't notice. But the woman they forgot was moving pieces behind the curtain. I spent my days networking, meeting people with connections in publishing, nonprofit boards, and media. I didn't tell them my full story. Just dropped breadcrumbs. Shared insights. Made friends. And then one night, 6 months after that empty Christmas, I opened my email and read a message from a local editor. Ms. Sutton, I heard about your foundation. Would you be open to sharing your story? We're doing a piece on women redefining retirement. I stared at the screen. Yes. Yes, I would. But not just yet. I had one last thing to do before going public. I bought a small commercial space downtown, a charming storefront with big windows and exposed brick. I renovated it quietly. No signs. No grand openings. Inside, I set up a resource hub for women over 60 looking to reclaim their power, financial advice, job retraining leads, personal writing workshops. All free. By July, it was running smoothly. By August, it had a waiting list. By September, I had 5 volunteers and 2 retired attorneys offering pro bono consultations. Still, no word from my sons. They didn't notice I'd moved. Didn't notice I was building something. Didn't care. But I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I was waiting for Christmas. Because this year, I would send out my invitations. Only this time, it wouldn't be for dinner. It would be for a reveal they'd never see coming. The gold-foiled invitations arrived the week before Thanksgiving. I designed them myself, well, technically with the help of a retired graphic designer I met at the senior center, who now volunteered at my Women's Empowerment Hub. She called them elegant with a sting. The front read, "You're cordially invited to the Christmas Gala and Reveal. December 25th, 5 p.m. Downtown Historic Hall. Formal attire required. Hosted by Clara Sutton. No last-minute phone call. No begging. No warm cookies and passive forgiveness this time. Just a printed invitation. No RSVP? That's fine too. I sent one to each of my sons. Hand-delivered by courier. I sent one to my daughter-in-law. I sent one to my grandchildren. And I sent one to the woman my son had gifted the ranch to, his mother-in-law. I made sure hers had a handwritten note inside. Come see what I've been building. I promise it won't be boring." That night, I sat with a cup of chamomile tea in my penthouse suite, watching the Christmas lights go up across the city skyline. There was a peace I hadn't felt in years, a calm hum of power just under my skin. It wasn't about hurting them. Not really. It was about showing them. All those years I spent serving, smiling, shrinking. They had erased me. Now, they'd remember every inch of who I was. The days rolled by with the excitement of a silent storm. I didn't even decorate my suite this year. No tree. No stockings. No lights. I put everything into the gala. The historic hall had been booked months in advance under a different name, just to keep things quiet. My team of volunteers transformed it into a winter wonderland. Twinkling icicle lights, velvet table runners, silver and forest green centerpieces, live jazz trio warming up near the fireplace. But the real showstopper? The stage. Right at the front of the hall, a custom-built podium with my name engraved in gold. Behind it, a massive black curtain. Behind that, the visual timeline of my rise. Photographs. Press clippings. Newsletters from the foundation. Testimonials from women I'd helped. Newspaper articles from the business journal titled, 75-year-old widow builds $2 million empowerment empire from scratch. Yes. That headline ran just last week. I made sure copies were framed and waiting. When Christmas Day finally arrived, I dressed with intention. Forest green velvet dress. Diamond brooch that had been sitting in a drawer for 20 years. A slick of red lipstick. And heels, low but dignified. At 4:45 p.m., I stood at the entrance of the hall, watching guests trickle in. None of them were family. Not at first. It was the women from my foundation. The volunteers. The attorneys who'd helped. The local reporter who had written the piece. Some women who had once stood in front of gaslighting husbands or cruel daughters-in-law and had found their voices again. They were my new family. And they were glowing. At exactly 5:07 p.m., the doors swung open. My eldest son walked in, looking confused. His wife followed, glancing around with eyes narrowed in suspicion. Then my second son. My two grandchildren, dressed nicely but looking bored, dragged behind. And the ranch-gifted mother-in-law? Oh, she arrived in a floor-length mink coat and heels too high for the slick pavement outside. The sight of them didn't send pain through me this time. It sent power. They looked shocked, like they had walked into a party they weren't cool enough to attend. Which, frankly, they had. "Mom?" my eldest asked, stunned. "What is this?" "Christmas," I said calmly. "You made other plans last year. So I made new ones for myself." I gestured toward the champagne bar. "Please enjoy. We'll begin the presentation soon." He looked like he wanted to argue. But there was something about the way the crowd parted for me, the way the volunteers came to my side, the way the staff addressed me as Ms. Sutton, founder, that stopped him. They weren't in control here. I was. At 5:30 p.m. sharp, I walked onto the stage. The crowd quieted. Glasses paused mid-air. And I began. Last Christmas, I set a table for 12 people. I cooked for days. I waited by the window for family that never came. The silence in the room was thick. But in that silence, I found something. I found my voice. And I used that voice to build something I wish I'd had years ago. The curtain behind me pulled back, revealing the full visual gallery of the Clara Sutton Foundation. A gasp swept the room. I continued. I invested the last decade not just in savings, but in women. In dignity. In second chances. Tonight, you're not just guests. You're witnesses. To what a forgotten woman can do when she refuses to stay forgotten. Applause. Real applause. My sons didn't clap. My daughter-in-law looked pale. The ranch mother-in-law was fanning herself. I ended with this. I will not be giving out gifts tonight. No sweaters, no pies, no framed photos you'll forget on a shelf. My gift is presence. Power. And proof that even after 75 years, you can still build an empire from dust. And with that, I stepped off the stage. The live jazz kicked back in. The champagne flowed. And the people I used to cook for were now guests in my kingdom. I didn't see their faces again until dessert. While guests mingled, took photos beside the gallery wall, and browsed the foundation's memory exhibit, I let myself drift, soaking in the energy. Women I'd mentored hugged me. Donors nodded with pride. A city councilwoman I once baked a pie for when she was down on her luck. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "They should have never left you at that table last Christmas." But in the corner of the hall, they sat. My family. My flesh and blood. For faces that used to be my entire purpose now looked like guests waiting to be dismissed. My eldest son kept checking his watch. His wife refused to touch her dessert, a crème brûlée crafted by a local pastry chef I now sponsored. My youngest sat with a drink he barely sipped. And my granddaughter? She scrolled on her phone. They hadn't come for me. They'd come to see. Maybe even to mock. But they weren't mocking now. They were silent. Uncertain. I walked up to them with my chin high, heels tapping across the marble floor like punctuation. "Enjoying the evening?" I asked, my voice warm but distant. My son forced a laugh. "This is something else." "You didn't mention all this, Mom," he added. "You run a foundation now?" I smiled gently. "I've been running it for a year and a half." His wife chimed in, sharp and sugary. "We thought you were just volunteering. Like, baking cookies and stuff." That tone. That condescension. Like my worth could only come from cookies. "I used to bake," I replied. Until I realized I could do more with my oven off and my voice on. That shut her up. My son leaned forward, squinting. Where'd the money come from? And there it was. The question he'd wanted to ask since walking in. The one that made his pride and greed wrestle behind his eyes. I answered without hesitation. "Your father's trust. The part he left for me." "But Dad only had stocks and I sold my wedding ring," I added. "And I sold the lake house you didn't want to inherit. And I sold that coin collection he guarded like Fort Knox." I looked him right in the eyes. "I turned what you saw as scraps into a kingdom." He blinked. Once. Twice. Speechless. "And why now?" his wife snapped. "Why all this drama?" I leaned in slightly, keeping my expression cool. "Because last year, I sat alone on Christmas, while the people I raised ignored me. I let the silence sit there, heavy and honest." "You all dined at her ranch," I said, glancing at the woman still draped in mink, still sipping champagne like it tasted wrong. "You could have sent a text." No one responded. My granddaughter finally glanced up from her phone. "Grandma, I didn't even know." That stung. Not because she didn't know, but because no one cared enough to tell her. "Well, now you do," I said softly. Then I turned and walked away. Later that evening, after most guests had left and the lights were dimmed to a soft winter glow, I stood by the gallery wall alone. The final photo on the wall was of me, seated at last year's untouched Christmas table. One plate. One glass. One roasted ham in the center. I had taken the photo myself. Set a timer. Captured my own pain. Now, it was framed. Lit. Displayed. A memory that used to hurt. Now part of a larger triumph. As I stood there, the ranch-inherited mother-in-law approached. "I had no idea you were capable of all this," she said, her tone unsure, almost shaken. "I know," I said. "You weren't meant to." She cleared her throat. "It's quite the statement, Clara. Very dramatic." "I prefer the word necessary," I replied. She looked down. "He said you were just tired. Lonely. That's why they didn't come last year." "That's the thing about loneliness," I said, turning to face her. "It doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I waited too long to stop begging for space I already earned." She had no answer to that. She walked away quietly. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave the venue, my youngest son stopped me near the coat check. "Mom," he said gently, "this was incredible." I nodded. "Thank you. I didn't realize you had all this in you." I met his eyes. "I always did. You just weren't looking." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell us you were hurting?" "I did," I whispered. "You just told me not to make everything about myself." He looked stricken. And I didn't say it to punish him. I said it to remind him. He stepped closer. "Can we fix this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But you're welcome to try." As I walked out into the cold night, wrapped in a deep plum coat with snowflakes landing on my hair, I felt it. The full weight of my name. My voice. My worth. No longer someone's mom. Someone's wife. Someone's side character. I was the main story now. And I had written it myself. You would think after that night, after the lights dimmed and the photos of my loneliness turned to art, they'd come running with apologies. You'd think they'd say, "We're sorry, Mom. We didn't know." But you'd be wrong. It's strange how people can witness your rebirth and still act like the fire wasn't hot enough to burn them. A week passed. Then 2. No flowers. No letters. Not even a voicemail. The only thing I received? A Christmas card from a neighbor I barely knew, and silence from the people I raised. But I didn't mourn anymore. No. I got to work. My phone buzzed constantly now, not with empty family group chats, but with opportunities. The foundation was being asked to speak at libraries, women's shelters, schools. People wanted to hear from the Christmas lady who built an empire. It was surreal. One moment I'm boiling cranberries, wondering if anyone will show up. The next, I'm standing on a stage with a mic, being asked how I turned grief into gold. They expected me to cry. I spoke instead. They expected a story of bitterness. I gave them blueprints for reinvention. One interviewer asked, "Do you think they'll ever regret ditching you that night?" I paused. Then I said, "Maybe. But this isn't about them anymore." And I meant it. But that doesn't mean I wasn't watching. Because in the corners of my awareness, I kept tabs. Not out of spite, but to understand just how deeply they were trying to rewrite the narrative. My eldest son? He told people I was involved in some non-profit thing, like it was a hobby between knitting circles. His wife? She posted photos of her Christmas feast again this year, this time tagging the fancy chef they hired, as if to rub it in. And my granddaughter? Sweet as she may have been, she stopped responding to texts altogether after the gala. Probably didn't know what to say. They were embarrassed. They didn't know how to face someone they thought would always sit quietly, always be the side note. So they said nothing. But I had one more thing to say. And I would say it publicly. I booked the community theater downtown for a one-night event. Not a play. Not a concert. A monologue. My story. Titled, "The Table I Set for Ghosts." Tickets sold out in under 24 hours. The front row? Reserved for local leaders, survivors of domestic silence, and the homeless shelter cook I used to chat with at midnight when I couldn't sleep. Back row? For seats on hold under my family's name. I didn't send invitations. Just left them available. They'd know. The night came. I wore a long midnight blue dress. My silver-gray bob framed my face with elegance, and I kept my expression composed, regal. The lights dimmed. I walked onto the stage with no music, no fanfare, just me and a single wooden chair at center stage. I sat. Took a breath. Then began. Last Christmas, I set 12 plates. Lit a fire. Made a ham from a recipe passed down 3 generations. Pause. They never came. The silence in the theater was thick. I told them everything. The joy I had in preparing. The nervous checking of the clock. The moment I realized no one was coming. The sound of the food cooling untouched. The echo of my own fork scraping against the plate. Then I told them about what came after. The pain. The decision. The fire inside me that refused to die quietly. How I sold the ring no one remembered. Sold the lake house no one visited. How I took their silence and built a platform from it. How I went from forgotten to featured. By the time I finished, the room was quiet except for a single sound. Sniffling. Someone near the front wiped their face. Another stood. Applauded. Then another. And another. Until the whole room stood in silence, then roared with clapping. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. I didn't look at the back row. Not yet. But when I walked off stage, the manager of the venue handed me something. A note. Written in nervous handwriting, smeared slightly like it had been clutched too long. One line. I'm sorry. I didn't know how much it hurt. No signature. But I knew. And still, I didn't text back. Because this wasn't a chapter for them anymore. This was the climax of my story. A few days later, I was asked to speak again, this time on a national radio show. Then came a magazine interview. They titled the article, "The Forgotten Matriarch Who Turned Her Pain into Power." I framed it. Hung it above my fireplace, where old family portraits used to hang. Now, I was the centerpiece. Not because I needed revenge, but because I earned restoration. They hear my name before they see me. That's how it happens when I walk through the doors of that country club. It's the same one my son and daughter-in-law visit every Sunday. The same one they whispered about like it was too fancy for someone like me. But now? Now I'm their guest of honor. A few heads turn. Conversations pause mid-sentence. There's a flicker of confusion, then recognition, then embarrassment. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Because here I am, in a deep emerald dress that complements my silver-gray hair, standing tall with perfect posture, makeup subtle but elegant, pearls around my neck and a calm smile on my lips. The woman they once ignored, left behind on Christmas like I didn't matter, is now the name on the donor plaque in the lobby. Did you hear? Someone whispers, not very discreetly. She's the new benefactor. Donated over $300,000. Renovated the entire East Wing. I glide past them with grace, feeling none of the shame I carried last December. That feeling? I buried it right beside the uneaten feast and cold cranberry sauce. My son stands up slowly when I reach the table. His face flushes red, though he forces a smile. "Mom," he says, as if that word still fits. I take my seat across from him, placing my linen napkin in my lap like I've been doing this all my life. The silence stretches. Finally, my daughter-in-law breaks it. "We didn't expect to see you here." "No," I say with a tilt of my head. "You never do." They blink. "I'm hosting tonight's event," I say softly. "Didn't you read the invitation?" More blinking. I sip my water, letting the weight of my words sink in. It took months of meticulous planning. After that Christmas night, sitting alone in my dining room while the roast dried out and the lights twinkled for no one, I made a choice. I would stop chasing love where there was none. Stop showing up for people who left me out without a word. Instead, I began investing. Not just money. Time. Intent. Strategy. I called an old friend from church who worked in local event planning. She connected me with the country club's board director. They were looking for a legacy sponsor after a major donor pulled out. I offered to cover the funding gap, with a few conditions. 1. My name on the East Wing. 2. My company, my voice, and my story told during the annual Winter Gala. 3. An invitation list that included everyone who mattered to them. I knew they'd show up if they thought they were being honored. And that's exactly what I wanted. Not to beg. Not to shame. Just to exist boldly in the space they once said I didn't belong in. As dinner is served, rack of lamb, seared vegetables, fig-glazed duck, I see the discomfort on their faces. It's not just the venue. It's the realization that I no longer orbit around them. The MC clears his throat and taps the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's event wouldn't be possible without one extraordinary woman. A woman whose generosity rebuilt this wing, whose work inspired the mentorship grant we launched this fall, and whose journey reminds us all that dignity and grace can rise from even the deepest rejection. The spotlight shifts onto me. I stand, slowly. My knees aren't what they used to be, but tonight, I feel stronger than I have in years. I step toward the podium. My heels echo against the polished floor. I speak softly, but clearly. Thank you for being here tonight. A year ago, I sat alone during Christmas. I had set the table for 10, roasted 2 birds, decorated every corner of my home. And yet, no one came. Not a text. Not a call. Just silence. A murmur runs through the room. Some people glance awkwardly at my son's table. I'm not here to name names, I say. I'm here to share what came next. Because sometimes, when the people you love most leave you out, you have 2 choices. You break, or you build. I pause, letting that land. I built. I tell them about the scholarship fund I started in my husband's name. The small catering business I launched using my saved-up recipes. The quiet community of women over 60 I created online, sharing stories and healing together. And then I look right at my son. Tonight, I'm not the one forgotten. I'm the one remembered. The applause is soft at first, but it grows. It grows because they see what he didn't, the strength it takes to rise with grace. Later, as guests mill about sipping after-dinner coffee, my son approaches. You didn't have to do all this, he says, voice tight. I didn't have to? I echo gently. And yet I did. He swallows. Why didn't you just talk to us? Would you have listened? His silence is my answer. I stopped asking to be included, I say. I started including myself in places I belong. He nods. It was just one holiday. No, I interrupt softly. It was every small moment before that. And then the big one that confirmed it. He doesn't argue. He just stands there, unsure. Not in control. It's a strange reversal. The child who once held all the power is now looking for a way back in. I'm not angry anymore, I say. I'm just done waiting to be loved right. And I walk away. In the parking lot, the wind is cool against my face. The stars shimmer. My driver opens the car door, and I slide in, taking one last look at the glowing building behind me. They left me out of Christmas, but I gave myself something better than their leftovers. I gave myself legacy. And that's a gift they'll never be able to return.